I'd like to begin by acknowledging that assisted dying, or assisted suicide, as I think that's a more accurate term for what we're discussing, is a very sensitive and emotive issue. Many of us do have family, friends and loved ones who we've seen suffer. And of course, it is those experiences that motivate us to want to prevent that from happening to other people. But the question before us today is, how should that pain and suffering be minimised? Should we, as suggested by the motion before us, change the law to support people who want to end their lives prematurely? Or is there another way forward? Now, let me be clear from the outset that my views are informed and underpinned by my Christian faith, by my faith in Jesus Christ. I regard all life as sacred, and I believe that all human beings are made in the image of God, and that no matter what our age, circumstances, or social status, every single life is precious, it has equal value and dignity, and is worth living. But it's not only my faith, it's not only my conscience that draws me to the conclusion that assisted suicide is wrong. It's also the fact that legalising assisted suicide is fraught with dangers that no change in the law will ever be able to mitigate. Now, it's important to state this. The motion today before us goes far beyond the scope of the legislation that's currently being considered in the UK and Scottish Parliaments. There, proponents of a change in the law are seeking to restrict access to assisted suicide to those who are terminally ill. But here, we are being asked to subscribe to the view that assisted suicide will be available to anyone of sound mind and settled will who is intolerably suffering, whether terminally ill or not. That phrase, terminally ill, features nowhere in the motion before us today. Now, intolerable suffering is a subjective term. Where it's being used in other nations, as we've already heard, assisted suicide is being granted for all sorts of conditions, even those such as tinnitus, anorexia, as we've already heard, bed sores, and even blindness. And it can also be very, very difficult to determine if someone is of a sound mind and has a settled will. The Royal College of Psychiatrists have told us that evidence is limited as to whether psychological assessments and psychiatric assessments of sound mind and settled will are actually an effective safeguard in the process at all. And coercion, of course, is almost impossible, actually, to detect. And the reality is that people's attitudes towards terminal illness can, and often, does change. Many people who feel anguish and despair at the point of a diagnosis or a significant and sudden change in their health may well feel at that point that they want to end it all. But they go on often to find capacity to adapt and to cope as they go on in their journey. The motion also suggests that assisted suicide has been linked to improvements in palliative care and has popular support. But those of us who attended the excellent briefing on palliative care by Baroness Laura Finlay yesterday, and this whole subject was discussed, know that that's not necessarily the case, because in those places where palliative care has improved, it's not done so at the rate that it has in those nations where assisted suicide remains illegal. And public support for a change in the law diminishes when current laws are explained to people and where the terms of assisted suicide are actually explained to them as well. So legalising assisted suicide would send a clear message that some lives are not worth living, and I don't think that that's a message that any civilised society, frankly, should be promoting to any of its citizens, especially when there are many people across Wales right now who are enjoying a fulfilling life in spite of their terminal illness or in spite of a debilitating condition. And I think that is why so many disabled people are opposed to a change in the law in this area. And we received a communication yesterday, Julie, I heard your comments earlier, but we received a communication yesterday from a whole host and coalition of disability organisations. Not one of them supports a change in the law. And that is because all of them recognise the potential for people to perceive a burden that they are someone who doesn't deserve to be alive. And I think that that is something we must make sure that we address. There's also, finally, if I may, another concern, and that is that where assisted suicide has been introduced, it tends to have a disproportionate impact on poorer and marginalised communities in society. And there's no doubt that that would also be the implication here in Wales. People with a decent income, a strong network of friends and loved ones, access to good health care, they would consider assisted suicide in a very, very different way than people who are lonely, unable to access good care, unable to access support.
Darren,
that has been the experience overseas, and it would almost certainly be the experience here too. So what is the answer? The answer, in short, is investment in palliative care, investment in end-of-life care. We know that Hospices UK have told us that they are facing a fundamental finance crisis at the moment, and together I hope that one thing we can all agree on, even if we might not agree on this motion, is that we must do more to make sure that they get the funding they deserve.